Hello, this is Evan Milner here, Molendinarius, from the Latinum Institute. And in this video, which will be a little bit of a rambling video, I suppose, I'm going to show you what is on the Latinum Institute's Patreon page. And I'll just slowly scroll through and show you how to use it. So if you land on the home page and you click on About or Overview, you get this. There are two levels of access: streaming, $5 or more per month, or downloading, $10 or more per month, and they're different catalogs. I'm going to first look at the streaming catalog, which you can access from here, where it says streaming catalog on the right, or if you scroll down the main page, it says streaming library, and I've listed what's on the streaming library here. As you can see, it's rather a long list of audiobooks and audio courses. And then the download library can be accessed either from here, or to scroll back up slowly so you don't get a headache, or accessed from here, download catalog. So the streaming catalog of Latinum, the Latinum Institute, is here. Each item in the catalog is ranked beginner level, beginner plus, intermediate, intermediate plus, and advanced. The primary Latin learning course is the Adler Practical Grammar of the Latin Language audio course, which has 97 lessons, and it is a complete Latin audio course for beginners, and it's also been used quite effectively by people who've learned Latin before and are relearning it, or people who have learned Latin to decode and have no oral, or oral for that matter, facility with the language. It's extremely gradual in its approach. It does cover a very, very large amount of grammar, but it does it relatively painlessly compared to most grammar books. It uses the Ollendorff method, and there's an article here about Ollendorff. So this is written by somebody called Ranjit, who found the Ollendorff method very useful when he was learning Italian. But the method used in Adler's Practical Grammar is the same method, and the textbook is the same textbook, just rewritten for Latin. It was the second rewrite. The first edition was actually French and Latin, written by Henri Ollendorff himself. Adler thought this was inferior and rewrote the book from the ground up. AESOP'S Fables in Latin. These are presented in English and Latin, phrase by phrase, and then read again in Latin only. There's an enormous amount of material here, accessible for complete beginners, but intended for intermediate and higher level students. Bennett on the pronunciation of classical Latin, just a short read through of Bennett's overview of how we should be pronouncing classical Latin in the restored classical pronunciation. Bible readings, these are slowly being added to. So Genesis chapter 1 to 19 has been done so far. The book of Jonah and the book of Psalms is a large project here. So the Clementine edition of the Psalms is complete, and I'm slowly adding different versions of the Latin Psalms, including Hebrew and Latin and Hebrew, slowly but surely working my way through. Bushing wrote a useful book called Liber Latinus in usum puerorum Latinam linguam discentium editus, and this is a introductory encyclopedic work that covers a lot of material and words that you would have if you've used the Comenius material, which I highly advise you do. It's then accessible. Various Caesar texts. If you are new to Caesar, then the deconstructed Caesar, probably the best. Caesar vocabulary, if you want to learn the vocabulary before you start learning Caesar or while you're learning Caesar, and then various texts in audio. Some religious material for the Catholic Church, Holy Mass in Latin and English, and Latin only, and a couple of other bits and pieces. Catullus, still in progress, so not all the poems are recorded yet, by a long way. A Latin reader by Chickering, some verses in English that teach Latin vocabulary by Sarah Coleridge, a Latin reader called Via Latina by Colla, and then the Comenius information, and the Comenius project is still ongoing. It'll take me many years to finish it. The Vestibulum is completed, and the Orbis Sensualium Pictus is completed. These texts are presented in Latin, English, Latin, phrase by phrase, and then they are presented in Latin only. So once you've got a handle on the vocabulary, you can listen to it a few times in Latin until you get used to it. Level 3 is a version in Latin only called Der Kleine Lateiner, which covers most of the material of Comenius, but in slightly different order. And then the Janua, which I haven't completed yet. Orbis Pictus Latine, the Kleine Lateiner, Lexicon Januale, I've only done a small amount of that. Rudimenta Grammaticae is a very basic introduction to Latin grammar in Latin only. Corderius's colloquia were very famous in their day, and for a few hundred years were standard texts. They fell out of favor when Latin teachers started to promote the idea that you can only teach Latin using authentic Latin that was actually written by an ancient Roman, and anything written post-Roman times had to be thrown away, no matter how useful it was. These little dialogues, schoolroom dialogues, are presented in Latin and English, phrase by phrase, and then in Latin only, and they are useful in activating your Latin, and I find them quite charming. This text we know was popular because whenever a student died at Oxford University, the contents of their room were catalogued, and the books they owned, and this was a constant popular book that many students appeared to possess. Cursus Linguae Latinae on YouTube, which I developed myself, audiovisual Latin course taught entirely in Latin from the beginning. It follows Adler, so if you're learning Adler's practical grammar, then this is something to help you along at the beginning as well. It doesn't follow it exactly, but the material is very similar because I based this on Adler. Dictionaries, various Latin dictionaries and lexicons. Once you get past a certain level, I believe that it's preferable to be using a Latin-only dictionary rather than Latin-English. Although English to Latin, I think, has its uses. De Uge is a popular textbook, 19th century textbook, and I've presented it here as an audio course, a complete audio course. I don't just read the book, I also give the paradigms and guide your way through it as well. De Uge wrote some dialogues, the Colloquia Latina. Erasmus, also famous for his dialogues. Here are some presented in Latin and English, and also again in Latin only. Eutropius, traditionally the first Latin text studied by a student, and a paraphrase of Eutropius in a simplified form of Latin, but also only in Latin. Useful, I believe, if you are about to enter the study of classical texts and your Latin is good enough to read something in Latin only. Fay, Carolus et Maria, a little Latin reader. Fenton's Child First Latin book, probably the easiest of the Latin, English, Latin books that I've recorded, and so I've got it down here as beginner level. Florus Paraphrase of Roman History, that's still in progress. Greek Catalogue, I'll look at that later. Grammar, if you are unfamiliar with grammar terms and you want to get familiar with them before you start learning Latin, this productive English grammar teaches you the basics of nouns, adjectives, articles, etc. in a humorous form. English, Hebrew and Aramaic Studies Index, look at that later. Pueriles confabulatiunculae, Children's Talk. This is still in progress, and I've recorded quite a large amount of it. I have to rewrite it as I go before I can record it. So, because the text I have is not really suitable for reading from painlessly. I'm up to chapter 5 at the moment. Also, Latin, English, Latin, with Latin only. I find this quite a delightful little book. Image vocabulary, just words with this can be downloaded as well in the download section. So let's have a look at this. For example, grips, hicke, third declension, and so on. And these are the various words with the Latin, the gender, and so on. A little picture dictionary, which is on Blogger. Okay. Historiae Sacrae of Lomond audiobook, and then Urbis Romae Viri Illustres, the Uge edition of Lomond. Various talks and lectures, chat rooms. This house party thing, I thought it would work, but I don't think it has really taken off. There is a Latin chat room on Skype, and then there are various Circoli Latini, and there's a Latin chat room on talk.io. I better link it here, I forgot to do that. Maxi, Cornelia, a storybook, a new Latin primer by Maxi for beginners, a serial and oral Latin course, which once again shadows Adler, and I recommend that students who are studying Adler also pay attention to this course, which is even more gradual than Adler, based on the Manesca method. Adler was also based on Manesca, but not as thoroughly. This is the Latin language YouTube course I mentioned previously. This declension chart with common Latin expressions, I believe, is very useful. It uses expressions that are found in English. I'll show you how this works. So, for example, first declension, nominative, aqua, nausea, regina. These are all words that we use in English. Aqua vitae, we use this phrase in English. Curriculum vitae, the genitive. Now these words are all different. Each phrase is one that is found in English or has been used in English. Second declension words here, brutus, annus, vinum. Third declension, fourth declension, fifth declension in the nominative, the genitive, various forms that I've found in English, and the dative, and the accusative, ad nauseam, habemus papam, postscriptum, or postscriptum in the Latin pronunciation, ad infinitum, and so on and so on. This should say post mortem. I think it's a mistake. Yeah. Oh well. Per diem, post meridiem, so on. Ablative. There are actually quite a lot of ablatives that are used in English. And if you look at this, you will find that you actually know quite a lot of Latin and study it. It'll speed up your study of Latin. Neo-Latin technical writing. I believe this is quite useful, and I should really record much more of it, because this kind of technical stuff, although it's not exciting, expands your vocabulary, especially if it's dealing with areas that you are moderately familiar with. Then it will improve your Latin quickly. So I've recorded the bits, elements of chemistry, this very famous letter of Van Leeuwenhoek, which is interesting, which he wrote to the Royal Society, and the Materia Medica, which is a pharmacology textbook, is interesting because of the format of the material, which is in the form of recipes, and it uses particular grammatical forms which are not found normally. Cornelius Nepos, Nutting, Pexenfelder, Apparatus Eruditionis, still in progress. I'm still recording it. Prendergast. This textbook is also still in progress, and I'm still working on it. Oral Latin Mastery. People have found this quite useful. It's a very time-intensive course in terms of the time required for me to produce it. Goes through the method, and as you can see, there's a reasonable amount here, but I've got a lot more to do. Pueromanus is a Latin reader, a little book which you can listen to. Julia, another little Latin audiobook which you can listen to. Various places you can go to speak Latin in real life. Reynolds Latin Reader, a selection of songs in Latin. Sonnenschein, a Latin story for beginners. And Pro Patria, which I produced in the download with photographs and maps, etc. It's about the Boer War. So of course for most of us that's ancient history, and as difficult to get our heads around as Caesar's wars. So to understand what's going on, I've provided some support material as well in the download section. Stamford and Scott, Junior Latin Reader, various stories, etc. A YouTube catalogue. I've got a lot of material on YouTube, and that's constantly expanding. I haven't updated this catalogue for a long time. But if you have a look at the YouTube catalogue, you'll see that there's a lot there. AESOP'S Fables on YouTube, Conversational Latin, the Orbis Pictus in English, the Latin course, bits of Pexenfelder, the London Latin course, Serial and Oral Method. And of course, if you go to YouTube, my YouTube channel is Evan1965. There's a vast amount more there. And then Virgil in Latin, English, Latin, in natural prose order. So that is the catalogue which is available for streaming online. And then there is a download catalogue which contains some different material as well. The internet here is rather slow at the moment. So the download catalogue for offline listening. These are divided up into small MP3 files. They're all numbered, etc. So they play nicely if you put them onto your phone. the Bible readings, Caesar reading book, Caesar grammar course, Taylor, Castley's prosody still in production, Chickering's reading book, Coleridge vocabulary poems, the Comenius project, including the color illustrations from the Pospicils edition, which I found. I wish I had higher resolution ones of these. They're beautiful. Eutropius, Nepos, still not finished yet. Still got more to go. Douge, Holy Mass, Lomond, etc. There's an enormous amount of material here to download and listen to. A lot of Latin. Underwood's Medical Latin Grammar, which is not available in the streaming course. Swallowing the Dictionary, also not available in the streaming course. And that's the download catalog as it currently stands. So that's what you'll find at the Latinum Institute for Latin. For Greek, a curriculum is currently in development, and I'll talk about that in a different video. So that's what you'll find. If you want to look at recent posts, you click Posts, and you can see what I've recently uploaded to the site. If I find something interesting, like an interesting book online, then I'll write about it. And as I slowly move way through things, they get uploaded here. And then I also have a place where I, if you click on Overview, scroll down. I'll try to do this slowly so you don't get a headache. You will find the Greek audio streaming library, Greek download library, Hebrew audio library. Some materials are available on DVD still, but not many. This is where all the people in the world are that have accessed this website. That gives you actually quite an interesting overview of where in the world there's interest in Latin. So you can see that the vast amount of interest in Latin in the world is in Europe and North America, a small amount in South America, almost nothing in Africa. Interestingly, a small amount in these areas, but not much interest in Latin, unsurprisingly, in the Muslim world, and a small amount of interest in India and the subcontinent, and Micronesia and Asia, and of course Australia, New Zealand as well. But the vast amount of interest is in Europe, and then even in Europe itself, you'll see that there are distinctions. Some countries tend to have more interest in Latin than others. And then if we cross the pond to the Americas, you can see where in America the interest in Latin is concentrated. This map renews every year, so after the year has gone by, it'll reset back to 0 again. Now, what I was going to show you, I got sidetracked, was updates, although I don't always update the update page. And here is the update page. with the date and what I have updated to the site. So these are changes to the catalogue. Right, so that's that. That's the Latinum Institute, and if you choose to subscribe, you get access to a very large Latin audio course and Latin audio library. And that's found at latinum.org.uk. Bye.